Hello, everyone. I'm Candace Montgomery, Senior Vice President and General Manager at atlanticLIVE. Welcome to the Atlantic Festival. This week, we've covered many of the issues that are top of mind for Americans this fall: the global pandemic, education justice, the state of our politics, and much more. For the next hour, we will talk about an equally important topic: climate change. Environmental stewardship is key for businesses today as they face increasing challenges from climate change, and even more informed customers who demand ethical, environmentally friendly, and sustainable products and services to combat them. Today, we've gathered thought leaders from the public and private sectors to outline the pivotal steps and safeguards businesses need to take in addressing climate insecurity. Before we dive in, I want to thank our underwriter, Southern Company, for supporting the Atlantic Festival. I also want to remind all of you watching that you can join the conversation in the Q&A tab on the side of your screen. Now let's get started with the first interview.
For a session on net zero or bust, please welcome Sarah Lewis, Senior Director of Innovation at the Sustainability Consortium, and Nick Starling, CEO of Skyscraper Farm, with the Atlantic's Deputy Editor, Ross Andersen.
Thank you, Candace, for that introduction, and thank you all for joining us. I'm going to dive right in. Nick, I'll start with you. All week we've been talking to leaders in sustainability about how to address climate issues. And despite the US not having comprehensive legislation addressing climate change, America's carbon pollution actually has come down from its peak in 2005. How did that happen, and how has the private sector helped?
Well, free and open markets, here in America, we have Google, we have all of these other search engines that allow us to actually be able to see where the entire supply chain is coming from, right? So we're able to be more informed consumers, which that's where a lot of this ESG is coming from. Is the end consumers are becoming a lot more responsible and sustainability minded.
Well, to that end, Sarah, where do you think companies feel the most pressure to act on climate change? Is it governments? Is it shareholders? Is it consumers? Or is it even prospective employees?
We see companies responding to consumers as well as investors. And also just their own experiences in supply chain, finding that the more visibility they have in supply chain, the more they work on sustainability issues, they find that their business is more efficient and more reliable and more resilient. And so there are certainly external forces, but also after, 10 to 20 years now working in sustainability, companies that have been at it for a while have certainly found return.
Say a little bit more about investors. Can you think of a recent example when investors really pushed a company to behave differently with regard to climate?
Yeah, we have seen partnerships between banks and retailers, for example, looking at metrics in supply chain. So if a company scores a certain score in an environment on an ESG score or other kinds of metrics, there is the benefit, the prioritization of that company in providing access to financing. So it's a pretty good model.
Nonetheless, the challenge to reach net zero will be huge. And I'm wondering, what are the kind of low-hanging fruit that still exists for companies, like practical stuff that, actions that can be taken today to work towards that goal? Nick, you first.
I mean, one of the other panelists is here talking about PACE loans, right? So there's also C-PACE loans, which Skyscraper Farm has in our fundraising plan. So C-PACE loans, commercial property assessed clean energy loans. So you get your mortgage loan, but you also get your C-PACE loan in order to help subsidize geothermal and photovoltaic windows, solar panels, and other qualifying green energy additions to their office buildings, to their manufacturing facilities, etc. And this all comes down to state legislatures. And there's a lot of states that have done it: Texas, Florida, New York, California, Maryland, Virginia, a whole bunch of states all across the country. Not every state has done it yet, but it needs to be passed at the state level. So it offsets the tax burden. So it's not even, you don't pay the municipality tax. It actually goes to CPACE and PACE loan investors instead. But that does need to get done at the state level, and a lot of states have stepped up and done that.
Hmm. Sarah, can you think of anything that companies could do right now that'd be relatively low cost to help with this effort?
What we see is to gain basic visibility into supply chain. The Sustainability Consortium has a program called Thesis, and this is a supply chain assessment tool that we've used over the past 6-7 years now, and we've seen that the average score on that ends up being around 44%. That means that with these few thousand suppliers that are responding to some of the biggest retailers in the world, about half of them have good visibility in their supply chain, the other half do not. And that is the first step in being able to address issues in supply chain and build resiliency and sustainability into these systems.
Sarah, there's some industries that you think it will be particularly difficult to go green?
Are there some that are particularly difficult? Those supply chains, those industries, I guess you'd say, that have many small and medium enterprise, even small like companies or actors, where there's a lot of in between and tiny little networks that have to be navigated. The toy industry, for example, is one that has a lot of small companies that make different types of toys and that come into the supply chain, and knowing who those suppliers are and accessing those is a big challenge if you're a brand selling to a retailer and trying to tell your sustainability story. We see that type of thing in supply chains that have those kinds of small and medium enterprise, or where there's just not a lot of vertical integration. Not promoting vertical integration, but that kind of visibility is challenging when there's less of that type of structure.
Well, COVID seems to have exposed some serious supply chain issues. And I'm wondering, can you talk about how climate change may stress logistics even further, and what we can learn from the pandemic to avoid major disruptions in the coming decades?
Well, a lot of the supply chain has switched over, because when the lockdown happened, a lot of companies had to switch their supply chains. Restaurants, cruise ships, hotels, etc. They lost their direct to farmer. Those farmers had to switch over. So you saw Instacart increase by, I think it's something along the lines of 800%. Amazon Prime sending people their groceries directly to their home. A lot of supply chain shift with that. But coming out of the lockdown, a lot of these restaurateurs and hotels and cruise ships are finding it hard to get the farmers to switch back over to them, which is why you're seeing a huge spike in grocery prices and food prices in general, because the grocers and the restaurateurs and all of them are having to compete with the direct to consumer model. So prices are going up. Farmers are nervous that lockdowns might break those supply chains yet again. So they're just trying to cover themselves while just in case another lockdown happens.
Nick, can you talk a little bit about Skyscraper Farms and its mission and how it relates to all this?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll, feed the world, save the planet, and the water crisis, right? Using 99% less water. Uh, globally, 70% of the world's fresh water is used on agriculture. And a lot of places like California using over 80%, which is why you have our viewers out in LA who, have to take those very limited showers. Uh, so agriculture is a huge part of water consumption with the water crisis. And then once it's used on water, once water is used on agriculture, it then goes into the watershed, which, around where I live, the Chesapeake Bay, 45% of the water has phosphates in it and nitrates, right, which creates nitrogen hypoxia. And for the non-scientists, that just means algae bloom and dead zones, right? So that increases the acidity, and that really harms, fisheries, right? Those fish eggs, they're not able to help out. So being able to, like Skyscraper Farm uses water, and other vertical farms, we use a circular system. So before it goes out into the watershed, we're able to treat the water. Then also, we're able to use zero 0.7 acres for our full flagship 52-story Skyscraper Farm. Use 0.7 acres, but the actual gross surface, our productivity, we're actually able to make about 650,000 acres field equivalent per year. So massive, which is almost the size of Rhode Island. So off of 0.7 acres. Now you can imagine what can happen to the farmland that gets displaced with that. That can go back to grasslands. It can go back to reforestation. That was one of the things I worked on USDA with in 2018 for the Farm Bill, was reforestation grants, because it was in our plan with Skyscraper Farm before the Farm Bill to have what we call the Eden Fund, where we would give what are now called reforestation grants to be able to buy these underperforming farms and turn them back into farmland, forests. So, and then feeding the world, making sure all of the kale and the spinach and all of the micronutrient fruits and vegetables of strawberries, tomatoes, produced year round within 5 hours of everybody on the planet. So then that way, everybody on the planet has a full belly, but not only has a full belly, has a full belly of all the nutrients necessary.
And Nick, I feel like, at least in a kind of science fiction context, that this idea of the Skyscraper Farm or something like it has been around for a while. What have been the major challenges? How come I can't walk down the street in Washington, D.C., where I live, and already see these everywhere?
Well, actually, I'm in DC too right now. But the DC and a couple of other cities have created offices of urban agriculture. So in DC currently, there's a director of urban agriculture, and they do a lot to help promote these vertical farming initiatives, as well as rooftop gardens, etc. So one of the big problems why you haven't seen it is only in the past 10 years has hydroponic and aeroponic and now recently, within the past 3 years, aquaponic, which is where you're growing the produce in the water, and then underneath the water you're raising tilapia, right, or salmon, or whatever kind of farm raised fish. So only recently have these technologies actually been able to go in the black, right? So before that, they weren't able to make money that much. And you can look at the Netherlands, right? The Netherlands is the second largest agricultural exporter in the world, even though they're 270 times smaller than the United States. They do that because they use hydroponic and aeroponic growing systems. They've been spearheading this for decades. But we're just now starting to get into it. That was another thing for the 2018 Farm Bill. Is I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with DARPA. But I sat down with the USDA, and we came up with the concept of AgARDA, which is the Agricultural Advanced Research and Development Authority, which is DARPA for the USDA. So a lot of advanced technologies are going to start coming out of feed the world technologies, and also terraforming technologies to be able to help bring climate change under control. Because you see all of these billionaires around the globe trying to get to Mars. Now, what are you going to do when you get to Mars? How are you going to terraform Mars when you can't even terraform here? We need to start investing into terraforming technologies.
I didn't think this conversation would get to terraforming, but I'm happy that it did. Sarah, tell me about, so one thing that I think people are broadly in favor of, making supply chains a lot greener. But they're also broadly in favor of Amazon Prime and other very low price shipping. And I'm just wondering, will net zero supply chains, in your view, increase consumer costs?
So, well, for net zero, I think consumers are by far, their interest in sustainable products has grown. We've seen it during the coronavirus pandemic. Consumers want more sustainable goods, and they're making that choice. And they're also selecting their retailer based on the kinds of sustainability practices. They want to feel good about who they're buying from. And I think this is part of what is driving a lot of the net zero goals and commitments. We see a lot of things like 100% recyclability goals and the regeneration commitments that you're seeing come out of Walmart, for example, and the investment in commodities and land use changes. This is all being driven by this response to consumer demand for more sustainable products, as well as companies realizing that where they're sourcing from is changing. They're having to readjust their sourcing regions due to climate changes. We just are seeing this with the renegotiation of the Colorado River Compact, right? And the agriculture in Arizona, for example, the ability to produce ag in Arizona will be affected by the amount of water that's going to be allocated from the Colorado River. That makes businesses nervous about how they're going to source product when these kind of climate changes affect the sourcing options. We're seeing it in the coffee sourcing, you're seeing it in wine sourcing. Watch out for all of our things we like. But as far as reaching net zero, these, it's, what is it, net zero by 2050, half of that by 2030. Those are big goals. We also had goals for 2020, but we kind of went by those. So we're going to have to make a lot of big changes, and consumers are going to have to make big statements about their purchasing choices. So like you said, we all like to have the easy access to a product that's delivered to our door, but I'm making a plea that these companies need consumers to make the statement that they want sustainable products. That gives the sustainability director in these companies the leverage they have to make changes. That it's the defense for the, certainly for the business, as well as just the ability to shift the way they're operating, to say the consumers want this, and that gives the people working there the leverage to demonstrate that to shareholders and the board members and so on. So if you're listening, please make choices based on sustainability choices of product, because the companies are really, especially those sustainability directors making these changes inside these companies, they need that to help them make that difference.
I imagine that some new messaging about wine being at risk could do some of this work for us. But I wonder,
I think so too.
have these goals spurred any notable supply chain innovations, kind of like fancy whiz bang things that people might get excited about?
It may not be fancy and whiz bang, but what we are seeing, which is very exciting, is collaboration and pre-competitive action. And if that doesn't make you excited, you need to try to get on board with it, because it is a big deal. really really that is something also you mentioned about the low-hanging fruit, something that companies can do and also consumers can encourage their favorite brands to do is collaborate pre-competitively on these really complex issues. So as Nick was mentioning, food access, very complex issue. This is not a job for one company to take on. It has to include the municipalities. It has to include the food bank system. It has to include policy. It has to include people across the supply chain in order to change the way the system is operating. And that means some parts of that system will be lost and some will be gained, and it's going to take all of this network involved in order to make those big changes. Where as far as some of the changes we're seeing because talking about food is like food hubs, regional hubs, is online kind of food matchmaking is growing in interest. We're seeing it in Australia emerging. Ireland has started this. The national government in those countries has led this. Here we're seeing it more led by some of the companies. But those kinds of collaborative innovations that make it easier to solve these issues like access to food or overcoming food waste, it's going to take that type of innovation to get this done.
I'm conscious that we don't have much time left, and I've really been hogging all the time for myself. So I do want to ask one question from the audience, which is a good one. Do we think that the general public understands supply chains well enough to hold companies accountable? And how can we communicate more clearly about it to that public? And that's for both of you.
Well, we've had the Fair Trade Association, right? They have their certification for a while. So something similar to that. There's a bunch out there that have ESG certifications, Sustainable Development Goals certifications, et cetera. Just demanding that those products have that badge on their products on the shelf.
Yeah, I would say that I want to trust consumers that they understand at a basic level that they want to learn where their food is coming from, where their products are coming from. I think people are learning and they're looking it up and they're figuring out where my product came from. Some of that's driving shorter supply chains. People want to buy it locally. Some of that's driving more visibility into some of these long commodity supply chains. But regardless, consumers are looking into where their products are coming from, and whether they use the word supply chain or local food or whatever kind of term they're using, they want to know where it's from, and that's helping to drive a lot of change and in the companies that are working in those networks.
Well, that's an encouraging note to end on. Nick and Sarah, thank you both for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next up, a session brought to you by our underwriter, Southern Company, applying a social framework to combating the climate crisis. Please welcome Dr. Mark Berry, Vice President, Georgia Power Environment and Natural Resources and Southern Company Services R&D. Bentina Terry, Senior Vice President, Region External Affairs and Community Engagement, Georgia Power.
Good morning, everybody. It's Climate Week, and we're excited to be here representing the Southern Company. My name is Bentina Terry, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Region External Affairs and Community Engagement for Georgia Power, a subsidiary of the Southern Company. Southern Company is a premier energy company that provides gas and electric service to over 9 million customers across the United States, as well as a number of other services. I'm here today with my colleague, Dr. Mark Berry. So Mark, why don't you tell everybody what you do?
Well, hello everyone. I currently serve as Vice President of Research and Development for Southern Company. I also serve as Vice President of Environmental and Natural Resources for Georgia Power. In my role, I am responsible for technology development for Southern Company, and for Georgia Power, I am responsible for our environmental compliance, environmental stewardship, sustainability, and how we manage our natural resources.
So Mark, why are we hearing more about public companies and ESG efforts?
Well, when you think about markets, investors for many, many years were focused on financial returns. That has really changed a lot in the past few decades.
What's changed about it?
Well, investors are starting to think about the long-term impacts that companies might have, and they want to understand the risk and the long-term potential or impacts that a company might have on our communities, on our environments, and so forth.
So it's bigger than your bottom line, right?
It's definitely bigger than your bottom line. So companies have really adopted the Southern Company point of view. Since our founding, our company has always wanted to be and always is a citizen wherever we serve. So we see the markets actually adopting our point of view, and that is exciting for sure. So Bentina, I know you know a lot about the S in ESG, or environmental, social, and governance. Tell us a little bit about how Southern Company has been involved in the East Lake community.
Yeah, so the S part in that ESG, as Mark mentioned before, is really about the social piece, and that's what it stands for. And it's about how you treat your employees, your customers, and your communities. And our values have always been about treating all three of those groups the right way. That's really, like Mark said, it's in our DNA. And so in the East Lake community, which is a community that is located in Atlanta, it was a community that was marred by a great deal of poverty and crime. And Southern Company has been part of an effort to really revitalize that community. And using the Tour Championship and our partnership with the PGA, we've seen a community that has completely turned around. That's a community where your zip code's not your destiny. And so it's by investing in that community, both through dollars as well as through other efforts, that we've been able to see the trajectory of the kids in that community really, really change. And so that really is what ESG is about. That S is about making those type of changes.
Can you speak about the recent announcement where the company is looking at a $200 million investment over the next 5 years towards social justice?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I kind of actually feel like these efforts around social justice is just taking the work that we've been doing in our communities and talking about it in a more collaborative or combined way. So you kind of think about it, every year Southern Company employees do over 200,000 hours, man hours, supporting our communities, and we spend over $65 million in our charitable efforts. This $200 million, which is part of our Moving to Equity piece, it's about giving $200 million away in 4 different pillars over the next 5 years across all of Southern Company to impact educational equity, criminal justice, economic empowerment, and energy justice. And so it really is about talking in a very concrete way about the great work we've been doing in our community and focusing it to have impact in those areas. So I'm really excited about that work, and it's just a real great opportunity to show that we're really doing what we say we do.
Well, for me, I'm really glad that I work at a company that thinks about community in such a way and is willing to make such investments.
So as we move away from the ESG stuff in particular, or at least the social stuff, at Southern Company we believe in a balanced energy mix. And so what does that relate, or how does that relate to energy justice?
Well, it's a really exciting time in the utility industry. In the past few decades, we have seen lots of utilities make commitments around climate. In 2015, Southern Company was one of the first to make a commitment to a net zero future.
Wow.
So we have a goal of being net zero by 2050. And we think a diverse energy mix is the way to get there that delivers affordable, reliable energy to our customers. So we're thinking about how we deliver the energy to customers, whether that's in wires or pipes. We're thinking about renewables, whether that's solar or wind. We're thinking about advanced nuclear reactors. We're thinking about hydrogen. There are so many exciting technologies that are going to deliver this net zero future. But what is really exciting is that we're not thinking about it in isolation. We are considering how it will impact our customers. For instance, When we think about our residential customers, so many of them have a limited income.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that as we go through this transition, that we're doing it in such a way where they can afford to pay their energy bills. Right? That's really important. We're also thinking as we make this transition, how our customers, all of our customers, get to participate in this future. We don't want people to have to wait 20 years to connect to this clean energy future. We want all customers to be able to participate on day one. So we're not just thinking about net zero, we're really thinking about how we do it in a way where we include everyone.
You know, it's really important that we have that equity lens for so much of what we do. And what you're really talking about is taking the equity lens and making sure we apply it to our business.
Exactly. And it is so exciting to think that way.
Yeah, and so good for our customers and our shareholders. So you mentioned that we were building a new nuclear plant, or that nuclear was a part of this. You know, we can't really end this conversation and not talk about Vogtle. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think about Plant Vogtle, remember I mentioned we have to have clean, affordable energy for our customers. Plant Vogtle, when it becomes commercial, is a 60 to 80-year asset that's going to provide low cost, zero carbon energy for our future. It's definitely a big part of our future.
Yeah, Vogtle is, I think we'll all be excited when the plant comes online, and we know through our existing nuclear fleet that it does provide clean, reliable energy for a long period of time.
Yes, it does.
Well, thank you for watching, and check us out at southerncompany.com/future to learn more about how we're building the future of energy. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us and for sticking with us on this conversation about energy, and specifically for joining us on this panel that is all about reskilling the workforce. I'm joined by Bracken Hendricks, who's the CEO and founder of Urban Ingenuity, and Stephen Clarke, the Director of Corporate Clean Energy Leadership. I just went to look at my notes to make sure I got your titles correct. Bracken, Stephen, thank you so much for joining me. So my first question for both of you is that if this country needs to make targeted big bets on renewable energy, which we know that we need to, and there are already workers with complementary skills and experience in traditional energy, how do we align supply and demand here? And Bracken, I want to start with you first.
Great. And I really like the way you framed the discussion. It's a matter of supply and demand in the labor market. We tend to talk about clean energy in the language of disruption. But in truth, clean energy jobs are jobs, and they're jobs and investment in skills that are well known. When we're talking about moving to a clean energy economy, we're talking about addressing structural risk in our current economy, where we are producing pollution, disruption, underinvesting in modern advanced infrastructure in ways that are destabilizing. So when we talk about clean energy jobs, we really should be talking in very familiar sectors. These are trillions of dollars flowing into the private sector economy, as well as state and local governments, to build manufacturing, to put skilled construction workers on the job, whether it's on large construction projects or building retrofits. So matching supply and demand around skill sets is really what it's about. We are talking about making American manufacturing more competitive. We're talking about investing in existing small businesses, existing large American industries. But there is a need to think about it sectorally and think about what's needed. There has been a lot of conversation today about the nature of energy and justice. There are people who have been systematically excluded from economic opportunity and economic development over generations. If we're moving trillions of dollars into new economic opportunity, new business formation, this is a huge opportunity to reinvest in urban communities, in rural communities, those who've been disconnected, frontline communities of color who have often borne the greatest harms of pollution, supporting women, minority, veteran-owned businesses. This new investment is probably one of the most transformative growth opportunities in generations. So we need to think about it as an economic growth engine and have smart economic development policies. And I hope we'll get into some of the specifics of that, because this is a huge sectoral opportunity and it should be exciting to everyone in the private sector.
Yeah, we will absolutely get into more of a discussion about that. And I'm really happy that you brought up the question of equity as we think about this, which is absolutely something I hope we can delve into in this conversation. Stephen, I want to go to you with the same question around how you're thinking about aligning supply and demand here.
Yeah, great question, and agree with what Bracken laid out. I think both the private and the public sector have been and can continue to play a leading role in syncing up the supply and the demand. As increasing amounts of companies are committing to decarbonize, we're seeing a steep increase in the demand for these skills, which Bracken just laid out. Some of them are very transferable from existing polluting sectors like oil and gas or the power sector, and some of these jobs are brand new. These are jobs that will entail some training and development that will help existing sources of labor meet the new demands from these sectors. So we think companies can actually play an incredibly important role on this front as companies make more of these commitments to decarbonize across all sectors. It sends a clear signal to labor markets and to policymakers that this demand is on the increase, and it can help create that sort of market signal that'll help state governments, federal government, as well as the private sector, create the training resources to build that supply of labor. For example, we recently saw that Ford committed to a science-based target, which entails a clear reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. On the heels of this announcement, they've announced that this will lead to the creation of thousands of jobs as they tool up and ramp up to produce the electric vehicles, the next generation of transportation that will help Ford reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And we're seeing this across companies in all of the major sectors.
So, Stephen, I want to stick with you for a second because you brought up training. And as someone who has covered labor and reskilling and kind of deaths or declines in sectors and rising possibilities in others, I think the question around upskilling is really important and is one that I don't know that we've really solved. What are some of the biggest challenges when it comes to upskilling a workforce to build a greener company and work environment? What are some of the biggest challenges that you see?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the most significant challenges is on the equity front, as Bracken just mentioned. So ensuring that when a company like General Motors, for example, which is another major automobile OEM, which has also made a significant corporate greenhouse gas emission commitment, ensuring that they have a clear recognition of where the gaps are in terms of the new types of labor that they'll need to produce the next generation of non-carbon or non-fossil fuel modes of transportation, identifying and conducting a landscape analysis of that supply chain and highlighting areas where they need new skill advancement and training, and then also identifying sources of labor that are beyond the traditional pools of labor that they've used or been dependent on the past to create internal combustion engines and their existing sources, their existing product line. So a robust and thorough landscape assessment of the labor market, as well as the incentive market as well. So, for example, Ørsted, which is developing some of the country's first offshore wind farms up here in New England, they've been working very closely with the Massachusetts state government to develop training and labor programs that can take skilled labor from a variety of different sectors, train them up quickly so that Ørsted can meet some of the ambitious staging timelines that they have for some of these offshore wind projects. And then meanwhile, identifying some of the competing sources of labor from other projects and ensuring some synergies there to make sure that there isn't duplication or any redundancies in the development of that labor. So I think those are two good examples of companies that are working very closely with state government, conducting landscape analysis to really identify the gaps in the existing labor market, and then developing robust policies that can advance the development of the skills that they need to build those projects.
Bracken, I want to come back to you to delve a little bit more closely into the question of equity. We know within the energy sector, as within all sectors, not all jobs are created equal. It does seem like in this transition to green jobs, there is an opportunity to think really intentionally about how those jobs are filled and about equity as a primary goal. How do we do that?
That's great. Equity is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. In addition to being the CEO of Urban Ingenuity, I've done a lot of policy work. I worked with Governor Jay Inslee on his presidential campaign, where we had the opportunity to lay out a national federal policy agenda about how to drive clean energy investment into good jobs. The framework that we used was to talk about standards, investment, and justice. I think when we think about economic transition, it's important to think about what actually moves the economy. Setting high standards in the rules that shape markets, whether it's a clean energy standard for utility deployment of electricity, or clean energy and energy efficiency in vehicles or manufactured goods, you're setting signals and incentives out there. You're backing that with significant public investments. We're talking about an infrastructure bill, a reconciliation budget package. There are trillions of dollars at stake. But justice is not an accident in this. If we're trying to move the economy, we need to think about the policy dimensions about who gets the jobs, what regions, what sectors, what workers, and what are the real barriers that are there today that need both market solutions and policy solutions. Stephen was talking about ESG commitments. There's a lot of pull from the corporate sector right now, trying to talk seriously about how to move their mission-based dollars into really building a better economy, because it's a better market for the corporation to function in. But there are also very important drivers coming from government policy. The administration now is talking about a Justice 40 program. There's an effort to put 40% of new clean energy investment targeting frontline communities, targeting communities of color, targeting those who've borne the greatest health and economic burdens of historic pollution and underinvestment. So these dollars can do a lot of good, and a couple places where they can flow. Certainly, we've had generations of underinvesting in skills and underinvesting in a well-formed labor market through support for unions, support for prevailing wages, support for benefits in the workplace. So there are opportunities to support high union density industries, very involved in infrastructure creation. But at the same time, at the bottom rungs of the career ladders, for disconnected youth, for folks coming out of the criminal justice system, for folks who don't have a deep resume, there's an opportunity to turn many of these jobs into real green careers. This will come from pre-apprenticeship programs, from skills training, from direct investment in small and local businesses, who are the real engines of hiring and the greatest source of new job creation. So as we look at whether it's retrofitting buildings, whether it's installing solar panels, developing new markets for services, for greater efficiency, for greater health and safety. And I guess the last point that I'd say is COVID has shown us powerfully the weakness in existing domestic supply chains, and a coherent view to how we build, manufacture, distribute, and get into frontline communities the products that are most in need. A detailed examination of those supply chains will expose not only problems and weaknesses for our national security and our public health infrastructure, but also business opportunities and investment needs. And each one of those is tied to skills and opportunities to directly engage key populations of workers within key local economies. And it's actually a very exciting opportunity if you start digging into it from a sectoral perspective.
Stephen, I want to stick with this question of policy and kind of what the government support that's needed to do this correctly is.
Yeah, there's a huge opportunity, as Bracken mentioned, in terms of the scale of this transformation, and neither the private sector or government can do it alone. Both working together on developing really robust solutions to both increase the demand for clean energy solutions like renewable energy, electric vehicles, energy efficiency, and the like, as well as bolstering the supply of labor. All of that goes hand in hand with the role that the private sector and companies can take, which is also very important and significant. In just the past few years, we've seen a tremendous increase in the numbers of companies that are making these corporate commitments, which really not only commit the company to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, providing a quantifiable number that they need to achieve in a specific amount of time. But it also mobilizes the entire company to change its business plan and its operations so that it not only reduces emissions, it also creates new opportunities and demand for new types of jobs, new types of low decarbonized products like electric vehicles or clean energy. And as well, it also addresses some of these issues around justice, inequity, and inclusion that we've talked about, where there are entire populations that have not been, and that have not played as, and that have not had a seat at the table in some of this policy development and corporate action historically. So both in tandem, private sector, public sector working together can really do a lot to really accelerate the progress that we need to get to a decarbonized economy by 2050 or sooner. We also need more companies playing a proactive role engaging in policy advocacy. Companies can play a very important role advocating for policies like clean energy standards, tax credits for renewable energy, EV tax credits, the whole nine. Companies have historically played a very important role in the creation of these policies and need to ramp up that activity and also ensure that their policies are aligned so that they're not on one hand advocating for clean energy, but also members of trade associations that are actively undermining that policy advocacy. So the private sector can actually play a very important role with policy development and advocacy for clean energy and climate-friendly policies.
Bracken, I want to come to you. So as someone who's covered labor and the economy for some time, a thing that I would hear a lot is that retraining, upskilling wasn't working for a number of different reasons. I'm wondering, do you think we have learned the lessons from trial and error in the past to get it right in this sector now?
Yeah, no, it's a very important question. And I've also done a lot of work with the labor movement and with worker advocates, and especially in fossil dependent communities and industries. These jobs have historically been the principal pathway into the middle class. If you're a mine worker in West Virginia, this is how you can earn a middle class wage. This is how you can send your kids to college. This is how you can have family supporting benefits and a pension. And so these challenges of transition in a stable, existing, and very, very important sector of our economy shouldn't be minimized and can't be minimized. And the politics of that transition are quite real. In talking with the labor movement, there was a time where folks talk about just transition as a gold-plated coffin. You're talking about how we're going to end my industry and end my job. That's very threatening stuff. However, in the current moment, the coal industry is shutting down due to market forces, not due to strong regulation in any way. It's competition from natural gas, it's global forces. And the biggest threat to mine workers at the moment is really the coal industry itself. Private equity-backed firms are declaring bankruptcy so they can shed themselves of pension and healthcare benefits to widowers or black lung survivors. There are serious economic needs requiring policy solutions and investment solutions to stabilize not necessarily the output of these industries, but the people who brought us our last generation of wealth. So then if you pivot, what is driving new growth, new industries, and new economy? It is clean energy investment. It's the fastest growing sector of the total economy. If you look at the clean energy payments plan that's under discussion today in the reconciliation bill, Evergreen, Action, and NRDC have done an analysis looking at 8 million new jobs created by putting dollars into utility transition. These dollars will flow into communities, in many cases in places where existing fossil fuel workers are located, where the infrastructure is located. We can have a regionally based economic development strategy that promotes manufacturing, that recognizes good infrastructure, and actually builds on the skills of these energy workers. These are important assets. And we need to think of it as we think about supply chains. We also need to think about the economic structure that's brought us growth and investment. And a lot of it is in construction, in manufacturing, in energy, historic energy industries. We're talking about rewiring the grid. We're talking about advanced new installations like offshore wind. We're talking about component part supply chains. So we need to be smart about it, but we also need to recognize that change is underway. And the worst thing for workers is unmanaged change that leaves people without benefits, without a social safety net, and without a pathway forward. So reskilling is part of it, but part of it is also a serious commitment to investment and a serious commitment to the policies that help navigate transition. In Germany, they've moved almost entirely off of their domestic coal production industry with very minimal impacts on those workers because they had a very, very serious focus. So there are examples of other economies who've taken these transitions seriously and not made them into political footballs. We need to care about the people, we need to care about the communities and the workers, and that's really what it comes down to.
So this is a question for both of you. And Stephen, I'm going to start with you. How important is kind of the baseline raising of environmental awareness and climate literacy to moving the needle on this and to ensuring that as we transition to a more green economy, that it is equitable, that it's successful, and that we're able to keep as many people engaged in the workforce doing these new jobs or these retooled jobs?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important, and I think it's actually encouraging that we're experiencing sort of a broader understanding, both with companies and investors, as well as policymakers, but also with the public at large, that climate change is happening in front of our very eyes, and these super these very expensive, destructive weather events that we've all witnessed in the past few years, and even this past summer, whether it's the heat dome in the Northwest, or some of these hurricanes that are, the recent rain event in New York. It's become very clear, and this was all outlined in the IPCC report, which was released a couple of weeks ago, that without major action, a real transformation in our economy, we're going to shoot through the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold in less than 20 years. And beyond that threshold, most climate scientists don't really know what comes next. What we can all agree on is that it'll be very expensive and have a disproportionate effect on different demographics in our society. So it's very encouraging that we're seeing a broader awareness across all stratas, across different political parties. And I think some of the recent political developments we've seen, especially at the federal level, and several of the policy measures that the administration has proposed have really started to take advantage of this broader awareness across all sectors, that climate is a real crisis that's affecting society now and demands immediate action.
Bracken, how do you feel about where we are in terms of climate literacy and how that will play into the overall awareness that helps us get this done?
Well, Stephen just talked about the crisis, and it couldn't be more present, right? It's now top of mind. We have forest fires, we have droughts, we have real people in real places experiencing very real painful costs. The flip side of that is also true. I'm incredibly encouraged by the opportunity that I'm seeing economically and in communities. I think it's very powerful, the conversation we're having about justice and energy in communities, and about clean energy investment as a pathway into family supporting middle class jobs. Some of the things I'm most excited about right now, in my role as CEO of Urban Ingenuity, we have a program called Working Power. And what we're doing is working with impact investors, corporations who are trying to make ESG, energy, environmental, social, and governance commitments. And we're looking in a very finely grained way at how to actually support a very robust pipeline of projects in low-income communities and communities of need to create real tangible investment and create auditable benefits that flow back to community groups to cut the costs of energy for low-income people, create greater housing affordability, to support nonprofit partners who are doing powerful, powerful community-based work on the ground. And this really tangible work in places with real groups and real people through Working Power and through many other similar initiatives is some of the most inspiring stuff that I've done in my whole professional career, because it's having real impact today, and we're demonstrating that a clean economy can be a better economy for real people, and it can create real wealth and a legacy of ownership and empowerment for those who most need the opportunity. So it's a challenging time, but I think we have a clear way forward if we're willing to step up, private sector, government, across the aisle, and really take these challenges on with real solutions. The solutions are there if we want them.
All right, we're going to go quickly to an audience question from Ron Ewald. I'm so sorry, Ronald, if I butchered your last name. Do we have the time to let the market and incentives be the drivers for the change required? Stephen, I'm going to toss this to you.
Great question. Well, we've got about 8.5 years to reduce emissions, 50 to 52%. That's an enormous task. I couldn't agree more with Bracken in that I'm very inspired and encouraged by some of the trends that we are seeing in the capital markets and with companies that have recognized there are trillions of dollars of risk from climate change if they don't act now. So there is some encouraging signs that the markets, coupled with some of the more pro or supportive policies that we're seeing at the federal and state level, especially since January, that's starting to turn the ship. That said, 8.5 years is not a lot of time. And while there are a lot of companies taking action, making the investments in the facilities, the plants, the new product lines that will decarbonize, that will help them get to net zero or zero emissions by 2050 or earlier, we still need a lot more corporate action on that front. So as the IPCC report mentioned, the clock is ticking very fast. And we definitely need more action, both from the private sector, as well as more leadership from the public sector, including passage of the current bill that's on the table, and much more ambitious bills that will help decarbonize the economy very fast.
Well, this is such an incredibly important conversation, and I'm so happy to have both of you here to discuss it. We're going to leave it there for this afternoon. Thank you both so much for joining me, and thank you to everyone for watching.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Very much.
And that concludes day 3 of the Atlantic Festival. We're going to take a break for the weekend, but we have much more programming in store for you next week, so mark your calendars. On Monday, our marquee Ideas Stage interviews will begin at 2 p.m. Eastern, featuring former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, designer Christian Siriano, actor Rosario Dawson, and Dr. Anthony Fauci. You can check out our full schedule within the event platform, and we'll send you an email reminder as well. See you on Monday.